Did you ever buy a watch for all the right reasons that ticked every box only to realise many months later that it has spent most of its time on your watch box and not on your wrist? Hi and welcome to Last Watch. Now that we have all the hype out the way surrounding the 50th anniversary of Omega putting the first watch on the moon, albeit on the wrist of the NASA astronaut Buzz Aldrin, yes, you heard me right, Aldrin, as it turns out that Neil Armstrong left his watch in the lunar module, I thought it might be a good time to highlight another astrological watch that has been somewhat eclipsed by the Speedmaster's endeavours. That watch being the Bulova Lunar Pilot Ref 96B258, more commonly known as the Bulova Moonwatch. It's a well-known and documented fact that Omega supplied NASA with watches for all Gemini and Apollo missions, with a suggestion that some 97 Speedmasters with the C321 movement were procured for all manned missions. That watch later earned the name Professional. Omega were not alone in vying for the NASA missions. Rolex, Longines and Hamilton also made it to the shortlist. But ultimately, Omega won the space race. Bulova didn't even make the top 4. Although each astronaut was issued with a Speedmaster, they were still considered the property of NASA and would be handed back in after each mission for testing and repair. Astronauts were, however, allowed to use personal watches as a backup whilst on mission. It's documented that astronaut Jack Swigert wore a Rolex GMT Master on the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission. That mission was aborted after an oxygen tank ruptured. So where does this leave Bulova? Well, this is where it gets a bit murky and you have to read between the lines somewhat. You can imagine that those watch brands that hadn't made the NASA selection were desperate to get a watch on the moon. One of those manufacturers gifted a prototype based on the same design and layout as the Speedmaster to astronaut David Scott. Now, as fate would have it, Scott's official Omega suffered an accident, a likely story, and he resorted to his backup watch. He wrote later in 1996, and I quote, "In the cabin after EVA 2, I noticed that the crystal of my Omega had popped off sometime during the EVA. Therefore, on EVA 3, I used my backup watch, which was of a similar type." End quote. At that time, he said his backup watch had been a Waltham. It was only years later, in 2014, that he corrected himself and said the watch had been a Bulova. Consider this. Before Scott's revelations, Omega had been riding high as the first and only watch to go to the moon. The following year, Scott's Moonwatch went to auction with an estimate of $50,000. This was the first opportunity for someone to buy an actual Moonwatch. I remind you that all the NASA Omegas still remain the official property of the US government. In any case, the Bulova blew away its reserve and sold for a staggering $1.3 million, topping out at $1,625,000 after adding on the buyer's commission. I guess the guys at Bulova must have wet their pants at this point. Suddenly they had a watch in their archive with some serious credentials. They would have been fools not to cash in, and before you could say the eagle has landed, they released a homage, or should we say a reissue, of their long-forgotten watch. On the whole, they've stayed pretty true to the original design. The only glaring difference is that the remake has replaced the mechanical movement with a high-frequency quartz. Oh, and this one is considerably cheaper. So how did the Bulova Moonwatch end up in my collection? I popped into a local jeweller's, Ernest Jones to be precise, to check out the Tissot Sea Star, which I was pretty keen to snap up. I had been considering the Bulova, but had already decided, looking at the specs, that it was too large for me. The sales assistant brought out both these watches and a third, a Hamilton Intramatic. Now this is why I'm a great believer, when possible, of getting hands on a watch before you buy. The moment I picked up the Tissot, I realised it just wasn't for me. The Hamilton tugged on my heartstrings a little, but I was surprised how wearable the Bulova was. I was a little taken aback by my complete 180, so decided to keep my wallet in my pocket while I pondered whether or not to buy it. A few days later, I noticed that Ernest Jones were having an online sale, and that they had the Lunar Pilot at half price. Not only that, but if you subscribed to their email, then they knocked off an additional 10%. I took this as a message from the gods and placed my order. I ended up paying £260 for this watch. It's definitely worth shopping around. A couple of days later, I received this rather substantial grey wooden box with Bulova branding. Contained inside was the Moonwatch, presented on a faux leather cushion in this pull-out tray. Unlike the Omega Speedmaster, choosing a Bulova Lunar Pilot is a much simpler affair. There are only 4 models in the current lineup. You can opt for this reference here on the metal bracelet, or you can choose the same watch, which comes in a commemorative box with a choice of 2 different straps. I think there's a slight premium on that watch, which you might be happy to pay for if you collect boxes. The remaining 2 variants have dropped the date complication and come with either a polished or black IP case. If you're interested in buying this watch, then check out the product links in the description below. You can also use that link to take you to the Amazon store, where you are free to shop for anything you like. It doesn't even have to be watch related. The channel will earn a small commission on anything you buy, which will go towards a future watch for review. Let's get into the watch then. We have a case width of just over 45mm, a case thickness of 13.6mm, a lug-to-lug of 53mm, and a lug width of exactly 20mm. This is an imposing watch and maxes out on my 7-inch wrist. I know I'd struggle to wear anything bigger than this, but bear in mind that this watch was designed to be worn on the outside of a spacesuit and visible through an astronaut's helmet and visor. Sticking with the case of the watch, it has a predominantly satinized finish, what I would consider bead blasted, not unlike the Hamilton Khaki Mechanical. This is ideal for a tool watch, especially so for a moon watch that is inevitably gonna get banged around. There are, however, a few highlights. The pedestal, or more aptly the bezel that sits on this case to mount the crystal, appears to be brushed, as are the tongue-style pushers on the right-hand side of the case. Look closely and you can see that the edge of those pushers are highly polished. I guess this makes them slightly more visible, as they have a tendency to catch the light. Now, when I look at the side profile of this watch, which is predominantly flat with only slightly turned down lugs, and then back to the pushers, I'm taken back to my childhood, watching reruns of the old black and white Flash Gordon series on TV. And I can't help but think the designer of this case must have been a 1930s sci-fi nut, as the watch bears an uncanny resemblance to the spaceships from that show. It appears to have the same rounded smoothed edges as the body of those crafts, and I'm pretty sure that's the tail section sitting right there on the side of this watch. Let me know if you agree or if you think that's a step too far. Back to the watch. Nestled between these tail fin pushers, we have a free-moving, easy-grip large crown with a rounded edge. This outside edge has also been polished and bears the Bulova Tuning Fork logo. The crown is a simple push-pull setup. That and the fact that it moves freely indicates 2 things. Firstly, that it's a quartz and doesn't need to be wound, and secondly, that it has minimal water resistance, a paltry 50 meters to be precise. But hey, there's no water on the moon, so I guess the only thing you need to guard against is moisture in the lunar module. Oh, and you best take care at splashdown. The rather proud looking crystal that sits upon this raised bezel of the watch and not within it is completely flat and 100% sapphire. It also appears to have some decent AR coating. Below the crystal we have a monochromatic landscape, not unlike the moon's surface itself. Nearly everything on this dial is white print on black background. Let's delve deeper. Around the outer perimeter is a tachometer scale. Now, I'm not big on tachometers, but in short, this is used to calculate speed and distance over time. We then drop down from this scale to the main dial of the watch. We have a sunken chapter ring, almost like a moat surrounding the dial. This has both second and fifth of a second increments printed on a base of radial concentric rings. These rings are barely visible with the naked eye. We then step back up to the surface of the main dial. Within this dial we have 3 sunken sub-dials, akin to craters on the moon, although it's fair to say that these craters have a Zen-like quality, as they also have diminishing concentric radial circles within them. They have a tendency to catch and reflect the light, adding some much needed sheen to what is a flat black dial. At their centre, pointed north, is a pretty basic stick hand. The sub-dial at the 6 o'clock position shows the passing seconds. Emblazoned across this is the 262 kHz, reminding you that this watch is a high-frequency quartz. It's somewhat ironic that the seconds hand is ticking. The subdials at the 9 o'clock and the 3 o'clock position are reserved for the chronograph. Elapsed minutes are shown at the 9 o'clock position and the tenths of a second at the 3. If we pull back out to the main dial, we can see the applied raised hour markers, which have the appearance of brushed metallic rectangular frames. These are filled with painted loom. The hour and minute markers are slim and pencil shaped. There is also a sleek looking hand pointed towards the 12 o'clock position with an elongated syringe tip for added precision. This is the main chronograph hand. All three of these hands are filled with loom. I'll throw in a shot here of the loom. It's a subtle cool blue in colour. Sadly, it's not the brightest or the longest lasting. If you engage the top pusher, which has a reassuring click to it, the chronograph hand will start to move, and this is where you see the magic of the 262 kHz high frequency quartz, as the hand will tick at a staggering 16 times per second, allowing for a buttery smooth transition of elapsed time. You will note at this point that the stick hand in the 3 o'clock subdial whizzes around at a blistering pace. Stopping the chronograph allows you to read the passage of time down to a tenth of a second. Restart the chronograph and the magic starts again. It's almost imperceptible, but the 9 o'clock subdial will show the elapsed time in minutes up to the 60-minute marker. Then you're kind of snookered, as that's as far as it goes. After the chronograph has been running continuously for 30 seconds, the tenth of a second indicator will stop running. This is a battery saving facility. However, behind the scenes, the time is still being registered. Stop the chronograph and the stick hand will jump to the exact marker. Resetting the chronograph with a bottom pusher sends all the hands back to their start positions. Both the seconds hand's indicators will fly back, whereas the minute marker has a snapback action. There is a simple date window at the 4:30 position, which has a quick set facility using the crown. And the only other thing of note is that Bulova is printed under the 12 o'clock indice. Moving on to the back of the watch, we have a screw down case back which is engraved with a Bulova tuning fork, and an inscription below that denoting the watch's historical importance, simply stating Apollo 15, the dates and EVA and also its location on the moon that make this watch so significant. What is quite nice is that this is all orientated to be read from the 12 o'clock position. I'm assuming that this is the case for all the lunar pilots, either that or I just got very lucky. The text is all framed within a circular border around which we have the other details of the watch, such as its serial number, reference, high precision quartz, sapphire glass, its stainless steel build, and of course its 50-meter water resistance. The bracelet is not entirely fitting with the watch, but then the original was never designed to be worn on a bracelet. It's a fairly solid 20mm wide brushed metal 3-link affair with no taper. On its own it's decent enough, but it jars somewhat against the bead blasted case. It's a perfect fit between these lugs, but it stands out as being a bit of an afterthought. I guess you could argue that it blends well with the brushed bezel and pushers, so there is a hint of continuity here. The bracelet does have solid end links and a nicely machined double push button butterfly clasp. They even added a laser etched tuning fork logo. Unfortunately, it lacks any micro adjustment, but does have a couple of half links. Sizing is easy enough as it has push pins. I removed 3 of the full-sized and 2 half-sized links for a comfortable fit on my 7-inch wrist. I like to wear my watches tight, which is an advantage when you're wearing a big watch. A loose heavy weight is only going to gain momentum and you risk losing your watch. I should add that this is a comfortable watch to wear. I don't have any issues with it at all, and although it may look large, it doesn't feel large on my wrist. The black and white of the dial is beautifully clean and clear, and it's very easy to read. This is a very clean watch. But I guess when you're in space, that's exactly what you need. So I have to make an embarrassing admission here. I've had this watch for some time. In all honesty, it's been a year. I'm not entirely sure why it's taken me so long to do a review. I think other watches got in the way and took precedence, and inevitably I didn't wear this because I wanted to keep it pristine for the review. But I guess I only have another year before the battery runs out, so best to review it whilst it's still running, and still under guarantee. There's a valid point there. The Lunar Pilot comes with a 3-year guarantee. Although I can carry off wearing this watch, over the last year my preference has been for something smaller. Only my Citizen signature breaks that mould. I'm also very much aware of that big slab of prone glass sitting on top of it. It seems unfair, but this watch is constantly in the shade of other watches. it may as well be on the dark side of the moon, which is a real shame. Bulova should shoulder some of that blame. They have a fantastic bit of history here, and they've underplayed their hand. They could really big this watch up and make much more of its significance. This is a watch, if the story is to be believed, that was used as a replacement to an official NASA watch. Their marketing department could easily go with the likes of, "When your moon watch fails, trust in Bulova." I'm sure they could come up with something way better than the other moon watch. Or maybe Bulova are playing it cool. The Lunar Pilot doesn't celebrate its 50th anniversary until 2021. That gives the company 2 years to create some hype around this watch and make some improvements. This is a quartz watch with 50-meter water resistance. There's no need for this watch to be this big, unless of course you put a mechanical movement in it. The original did have a mechanical movement inside a much smaller case, so why is this watch bigger and a quartz? Bulova, shave some millimeters off this case width and thickness and make this watch much more wearable to a bigger audience, please. Now that I've finally finished this watch review, I'm hoping my beloved Bulova gets some much needed wrist time and spends less time in the dark. Before I go, I would just like to make an appeal on behalf of NASA. If anyone knows the whereabouts of the original moon watch, then please get in touch. I promise that our conversation will remain strictly confidential. And for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, well, that's another likely story. Be sure to like this video, and if you haven't already done so, then please subscribe to the channel. It makes a world of difference. Let me know your thoughts on the Bulova moon watch. Do you have one? And more importantly, do you wear it? Indeed, are there any watches in your collection that have been lost in space or left gathering dust? I make a point of reading every comment, and if you ask me a question, I'll do my best to answer it. But it has to be said that some of you guys know a lot more about watches than I do. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.